What if the worst date of your life was a trap? Chloe thought she was doing her runaway sister a massive favor by taking her place at a luxury dinner. She didn't know the man across the table owned the city's underworld, and she definitely didn't know she was the collateral. The frantic text message from Vanessa had arrived while Chloe was halfway through a pint of Ben & Jerry's, wearing her oldest sweatpants. "Chloe, please. I'm at O'Hare. I have to leave the country. I'm supposed to meet a guy at Bavette's Bar and Berth at 8 p.m. If I no-show, they'll come looking for me. Just go. Pretend to be me. Stall him. Tell him I got sick. Anything. Please. My life depends on it." Chloe Mitchell stared at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. Vanessa was always doing this, spinning out of control, leaving chaos in her wake, and expecting her older sister to clean it up. Vanessa was the golden child, the pageant winner, the statuesque blonde with a waist the size of a teacup and a knack for finding wealthy, dangerous men. Chloe, on the other hand, was the reality check. She was a thick, fat, fiercely intelligent woman who worked as a historical archivist at the Field Museum. She loved her body, loved her soft curves and heavy thighs, but she was under no illusions about how the world, and her sister's elite social circles, viewed her. Still, Vanessa had said her life depended on it, which was how Chloe found herself, standing outside the dimly lit, ultra-exclusive facade of Bavette's in downtown Chicago, shivering in the crisp October wind. She hadn't tried to squeeze into any of Vanessa's clothes. That would have been physically impossible and humiliating. Instead, she wore her favorite deep emerald wrap dress, the heavy velvet clinging beautifully to her large hips and full bust, paired with sensible but elegant black heels. She took a deep breath, smoothing down the fabric over her stomach, and pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The hostess, a waif-like woman clutching a leather-bound reservation book, looked Chloe up and down with barely concealed surprise. "Can I help you?" "Mitchell," Chloe said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I'm here to meet someone." The hostess's eyes widened slightly, her demeanor shifting instantly to obsequious terror. "Of course. Right this way." He requested the private vault room downstairs. Chloe frowned. The private vault room? Vanessa really had outdone herself with this blind date. As Chloe followed the hostess down a dimly lit staircase, the sounds of the bustling restaurant faded, replaced by the soft, smooth jazz, filtering through hidden speakers and the heavy scent of aged leather and expensive bourbon. The hostess opened a heavy oak door and stepped back, refusing to meet the eye of the man sitting inside. Chloe stepped into the room. Sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table was a man who seemed to swallow the light in the room. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that clung perfectly to the broad, terrifying span of his shoulders. His hair was dark, neatly swept back, framing a face carved from granite. But it was his eyes that stopped Chloe dead in her tracks. They were the color of an impending storm, a dark, fathomless gray that locked onto her with the intensity of a predator spotting its prey. He didn't stand. He simply swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, leaning back in his leather chair. "You're not Vanessa," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, smooth, but lined with razor wire. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of absolute fact. Chloe's throat felt entirely dry. She clutched her small leather clutch in front of her. "No, I'm not. I'm her sister, Chloe." The man tilted his head, a dark, dangerous amusement flickering in those storm cloud eyes. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit, Chloe." She hesitated. Every survival instinct she possessed, instincts honed by years of navigating a world that constantly tried to make her feel small, was screaming at her to turn around and run up those stairs. But she thought of Vanessa crying at O'Hare. Chloe walked forward, her velvet dress swishing softly, and took the seat. She kept her posture impeccably straight, refusing to shrink herself under his intense, evaluating stare. His eyes dragged over her, slowly, deliberately. They took in the fullness of her face, the heavy curve of her breasts pressing against the emerald velvet, the thick, soft lines of her waist and hips visible even as she sat. There was no disgust in his gaze, no dismissal. Instead, there was a sudden, sharp heat that made the breath catch in her lungs. "Vanessa told me she couldn't make it," Chloe lied, her voice remarkably even. "She came down with a sudden, severe flu. She asked me to come in her place to apologize for the inconvenience." The man let out a dark, cynical chuckle. He set his glass down on the table with a definitive clink. "A severe flu. Is that what we're calling a one-way ticket to Buenos Aires?" Chloe's blood turned to ice. She stared at him. "How do you—" "I know exactly where your sister is, Chloe," he interrupted smoothly. He steepled his fingers, the heavy gold of a signet ring catching the dim chandelier light. "My name is Dominic Castellano. Did Vanessa happen to mention who she was supposed to be meeting tonight?" Chloe's heart plummeted into her stomach. Dominic Castellano. She didn't run in elite, dangerous circles, but anyone who lived in Chicago and read the news knew that name. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was the head of the Castellano Syndicate, the most ruthless organized crime family in the Midwest. He owned shipping ports, real estate, and politicians. "No," Chloe whispered, her bravado finally fracturing. "She just said, a blind date." "A blind date," Dominic repeated, the words dripping with dark irony. "Is that what she told you? That I was some lonely bachelor looking for companionship?" He leaned forward, the shadows catching the sharp angles of his jaw. "Vanessa wasn't coming here for a date, Chloe. She was coming here to pay off a debt. And since she decided to run, it seems she sent you to settle the ledger." The silence in the private dining room was suffocating. Chloe could hear the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner, sounding like a bomb counting down. "A debt?" Chloe managed to say, her fingers digging so tightly into her clutch that her knuckles ached. "I don't know anything about a debt. Vanessa is flighty, yes, but she wouldn't—" "She wouldn't?" Dominic arched a dark eyebrow. "Let me educate you, Chloe. Your sister's current boyfriend, a pathetic excuse for a man named Tommy Russo, decided to skim $3 million from one of my offshore operations. He thought he was clever. He wasn't." Chloe felt sick. Tommy. She'd met him once. A slick, sweaty man with wandering eyes and cheap cologne. Vanessa had insisted he was an entrepreneur. "Tommy didn't have the money to pay me back," Dominic continued, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than millions of stolen dollars. "But Tommy did have Vanessa. He offered her to me. An arranged marriage, to publicly merge some of Tommy's legitimate shell companies into my portfolio and secure my peace. Vanessa agreed to it to save her own skin. Tonight was supposed to be the final arrangement. The engagement. Chloe felt the world tilt on its axis. "You're talking about buying and selling my sister. You're insane." "I'm a businessman," Dominic corrected coldly. "A deal was struck. A signature was required. Instead, Vanessa went to the airport, and she sent you here as the decoy." The reality of Vanessa's betrayal slammed into Chloe like a physical blow. Vanessa hadn't just been trying to avoid a bad date. She had deliberately sent her older, trusting sister into the jaws of a mafia boss to buy herself time to flee the country. Vanessa had sacrificed her. Tears pricked the corners of Chloe's eyes. but she refused to let them fall. She drew herself up, letting anger override her fear. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the stone floor. "Well, Mr. Castellano, I am not my sister. I had nothing to do with Tommy Russo. I had nothing to do with your stolen money, and I certainly have no intention of marrying a mobster. So if you'll excuse me, I'm going home." She turned on her heel, her heavy, soft thighs brushing together beneath her dress, and took 2 steps toward the heavy oak door. "Sit down, Chloe." The command wasn't loud, but it possessed a quiet, absolute authority that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "No," she said firmly, reaching for the brass handle. Before her hand could make contact, the door swung open from the outside. 2 massive men in dark suits stepped into the doorway, completely blocking her exit. One of them, a man with a jagged scar running down his jawline, casually adjusted his jacket, briefly exposing the matte black grip of a Glock 19 tucked into his waistband. Chloe froze, her breath catching in her throat. She took a slow step backward. "I told you to sit," Dominic said from behind her. Slowly, Chloe turned back to face him. He was standing now, buttoning the front of his jacket. He was even taller than she had realized, imposing and lethally graceful. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them until he was mere inches away. Chloe was a tall, substantial woman, but Dominic made her feel entirely enveloped. She tilted her head back to look him in the eye, refusing to shrink. "You can't keep me here," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I have a job. I have friends. People will notice if I go missing. People will assume you took a spontaneous trip to see your sister," Dominic replied smoothly. He reached out, and Chloe flinched, but he only gently tucked a stray lock of her dark brown hair behind her ear. His touch was shockingly warm. Vanessa broke a contract. In my world, blood pays for blood. If the debtor flees, the family assumes the debt. "I don't have $3 million, she spat out, slapping his hand away. Dominic didn't look angry at her defiance. If anything, the amusement in his eyes deepened. "I don't want your money, Chloe. I need a wife. My lieutenants, my rivals, they are starting to view my bachelor status as a weakness, a lack of stability. I agreed to marry Vanessa because it solved a problem. But looking at you," his gaze dropped to her mouth, then lower, taking in the full, heavy swell of her cleavage, the soft roundness of her stomach, the sturdy thickness of her hips. It wasn't the clinical, disgusted look she was used to from men in designer suits. It was raw, possessive hunger. "I think the sister is a much better deal." "You're out of your mind if you think I'm going to marry you," she hissed. Dominic signaled to the men at the door. "Bring the car around. We're leaving." He looked back down at Chloe. "You can walk out of here on my arm, pretending everything is perfectly fine, or my men can carry you out through the service elevator. Given how magnificent you look in that dress, I'd hate to see it wrinkled." Chloe looked at the armed men, then back at the ruthless, gorgeous monster in front of her. She had no choice. Trembling with rage and terror, she hooked her arm through the one he offered. Within minutes, she was ushered out the back entrance of the restaurant and thrust into the cavernous, leather-scented back seat of an armored Mercedes Maybach. The doors locked with a heavy, definitive thud. As the car pulled away, merging into the glowing Chicago night, Chloe stared out the tinted window, realizing with a sickening drop in her stomach that her life as she knew it was entirely over. The drive north was mostly silent, the tension in the back seat of the Maybach thick enough to choke on. Dominic sat beside her, radiating a quiet, dangerous energy. He was on his phone, typing out messages, unbothered by the fact that he had just abducted a woman. Chloe stared out the window, watching the city skyline fade into the wealthy, sprawling suburbs of the North Shore. When the car finally turned off a winding, tree-lined road in Lake Forest, they approached massive wrought-iron gates. At a nod from the driver, the gates swung open, revealing a sprawling, stone mansion that looked less like a home and more like a modern fortress. Floodlights illuminated the manicured grounds, and Chloe could see men patrolling the perimeter, earpieces glowing faintly in the dark. The car stopped in front of the sweeping stone steps. The door was pulled open, and Dominic stepped out, waiting for her. Chloe didn't move. She sat stubbornly in the leather seat, glaring at him. "We can do this the hard way, Chloe," Dominic said softly, leaning into the doorway. "But it's been a long night, and I'd rather not carry you over my shoulder." "Don't call me Chloe," she snapped. But she slid out of the car, her heels clicking against the cobblestone driveway. He led her through towering mahogany doors into a foyer that dripped with aggressive wealth, marble floors, a sweeping double staircase, and a massive crystal chandelier. Yet, despite the luxury, it felt cold, sterile. "Leo will show you to your room," Dominic said, gesturing to a stoic, broad-shouldered man waiting by the stairs. "Lock the door if it makes you feel better. The windows are bulletproof and shatter-resistant. Don't try to break them." Chloe planted her feet on the marble. "I'm not going to a room. I'm not your prisoner." "You are exactly my prisoner," Dominic said, his voice dropping a dangerous octave. He stepped closer, towering over her. "Until I decide what to do about the $3 million your sister cost me, you belong to me." Chloe looked up at him, her chest heaving with indignation. She was a fat woman who had spent her entire life being told to take up less space, to be quiet, to apologize for existing. She was done apologizing. "I didn't eat dinner," she blurted out, surprising even herself. Dominic blinked, visibly derailed. "Excuse me, I didn't eat dinner," Chloe repeated, her voice rising. "Vanessa interrupted me when I was eating ice cream, and then I went to that stupid steakhouse, and then you kidnapped me before I could even look at a menu. If I'm going to be a hostage, I demand to be fed." For a long, tense moment, the foyer was dead silent. The guard, Leo, looked like he was bracing for Dominic to strike her. Instead, the corner of Dominic's mouth twitched. Then he threw his head back and let out a genuine, booming laugh that echoed off the marble walls. "You're hungry," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange, intense fascination. "Starving," Chloe shot back, crossing her arms over her chest, which only served to push her heavy breasts higher against the velvet neckline. Dominic's eyes dropped there, lingering unabashedly before meeting her gaze again. "Come with me," he said, shaking his head slightly as if trying to clear it. He didn't take her to a dining room. He led her down a wide hallway and into a massive, state-of-the-art industrial kitchen. He dismissed the 2 staff members, cleaning the counters with a wave of his hand. Once they were alone, Dominic took off his suit jacket, draped it over a stool, and rolled up the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and dusted with dark ink. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to the marble island. Chloe sat, utterly bewildered, watching as the ruthless head of the Castellano family opened a massive stainless steel refrigerator. He pulled out fresh pasta, a block of Parmigiano Reggiano, heavy cream, and pancetta. Moving with practiced, sharp efficiency, he began to cook. "You cook?" Chloe asked, the absurdity of the situation making her dizzy. "My grandmother would have killed me if I didn't learn," he said, tossing the pancetta into a hot pan. The kitchen quickly filled with the rich, intoxicating smell of rendering pa and garlic. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Vanessa would have asked for a salad, no dressing. Then she would have picked at it and complained. Vanessa is afraid of anything that tastes good, Chloe said defensively. I'm not. I can see that, Dominic said softly. He brought a steaming bowl of carbonara over to the island and set it in front of her, sliding a silver fork beside it. He leaned across the marble, his face inches from hers. I despise women who starve themselves to fit into a mold. You are lush, Chloe. Soft. Real. It's intoxicating. A hot flush crept up Chloe's neck. She looked down at the food, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took a bite, and it was incredible, but she could barely taste it over the roaring in her ears. He was watching her eat, watching her mouth, tracking the movement of her throat. Suddenly, a deafening crash shattered the quiet of the house. The sound of shattering glass and splintering wood echoed from the front of the mansion, followed immediately by the rapid, terrifying pop, pop, pop of automatic gunfire. Dominic's demeanor flipped instantly. The dark, seductive man vanished, replaced by a cold-blooded killer. He lunged across the island, grabbing Chloe by the waist. His grip was bruising, pulling her heavy frame against his solid chest with shocking ease. "What's happening?" Chloe screamed, dropping the fork. "Moretti family," Dominic snarled, dragging her towards the back of the kitchen. "They must have tracked the car. Move!" He practically carried her to a massive pantry. He slammed his palm against a hidden keypad behind a shelf of olive oil. The back wall of the pantry slid open, revealing a dark, steel-lined corridor. He shoved her inside just as the kitchen doors burst open behind them. Dominic whipped a handgun out from his holster, so fast Chloe barely saw it, and fired twice into the kitchen before hitting the button to seal the safe room door. The heavy steel slammed shut, plunging them into pitch blackness for a split second before dim emergency lights flickered on. Chloe collapsed against the cold metal wall, hyperventilating. Outside, the muffled thud of gunfire and shouting raged, but inside the cramped, concrete-walled panic room, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Dominic holstered his weapon and turned to talk to her. In the tight space, there was nowhere for her to go. His chest was brushing against hers, his thighs caging her legs. He reached out, his large hands gripping her soft waist, anchoring her. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his eyes scanning her frantically. No, she stuttered, trembling violently. "I'm fine." He let out a ragged breath, leaning his forehead against hers. The adrenaline, the fear, the claustrophobic proximity, it all collided in the tiny, oxygen-deprived space. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes wide, realizing the terrifying truth. She was trapped in a cage with a monster. But right now, the only thing she felt was an overwhelming, burning desire to be devoured by him. The panic room was no larger than a walk-in closet, lined with gunmetal steel and smelling faintly of ozone and Dominic's bespoke cedarwood cologne. Above them, the muffled, heavy thuds of the assault rifle fire vibrated through the ceiling, a terrifying symphony of violence. Chloe stood frozen against the cold wall, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow pants. The emerald velvet of her dress was crushed against Dominic's chest, the heat radiating off his massive frame, the only thing keeping her from collapsing into a shivering heap. "Breathe, Chloe," Dominic murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through her own chest. His large hands rested firmly on the thick curve of her hips, grounding her in the darkness. The walls are titanium reinforced. The door operates on a closed hydraulic circuit. The Morettis could detonate a C4 charge on the other side of that wall, and all it would do is ruin my kitchen. "You say that like it happens every Tuesday," she gasped, her fingers instinctively curling into the lapels of his ruined, blood-spattered shirt. "Not every Tuesday," he replied, a dark smirk evident even in the dim red glow of the emergency lights. "Usually Thursdays." The joke, dry and utterly out of place, broke the paralyzing spell of her terror. Chloe let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She looked up into his stormy grey eyes, realizing with a jolt that he wasn't afraid. He was calculating. "They didn't just guess I was here," Dominic said, his expression hardening into something terrifyingly predatory. His thumb traced a slow, deliberate circle over the soft swell of her hip, a subconscious motion that sent a jolt of liquid heat straight to her core. "My schedule is heavily guarded. The only reason the Morettis would hit the Lake Forest estate tonight is if someone tipped them off, someone who knew I was supposed to be busy finalizing a deal." Chloe's breath hitched as the realization dawned on her. "Tommy?" "Exactly," Dominic confirmed, his eyes flashing with lethal intent. "Tommy Russo didn't just steal $3 million. He sold out my location to the Moretti family to wipe his debt clean. If I'm dead, he keeps the money and gets rid of the man hunting him." The absolute horror of the situation crashed over Chloe in a tidal wave. Vanessa knew I was coming here. She set up the time. She gave me the reservation at Bavette's." Her voice cracked, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "She didn't just send me here as a distraction so she could run. She sent me into a hit. She sent me here to die." A low, vicious growl rumbled from Dominic's throat. Before Chloe could turn away to hide her tears, he moved. His hands shifted from her hips, sliding up the thick, soft curve of her waist to cup her face. His long fingers tangled in her dark hair, tilting her head back so she was forced to look at him. "Listen to me," Dominic commanded, the raw intensity in his voice stripping away the polished mafia boss, leaving only the fierce, territorial man underneath. "Your sister is a coward. She looked at you and saw a pawn. But she made the greatest miscalculation of her life, because she handed me a queen." Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. "I'm just an archivist, Dominic. I'm nobody. I'm the fat, boring older sister who reads historical manuscripts." "You are breathtaking," he interrupted fiercely. "You sat across from the most dangerous man in Chicago, and instead of cowering, you demanded I feed you." His gaze dropped to her mouth, his eyes darkening with a hunger that had absolutely nothing to do with food. "I have been surrounded by synthetic, starving, climbing women my entire life. You are the first real thing to walk into my territory in a decade." He didn't ask for permission. He didn't need to. The air between them was already thick with an unbearable electric tension. Dominic crashed his mouth down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. His lips were hot, demanding, bruising in their intensity. Chloe gasped into his mouth, and he took immediate advantage, his tongue sweeping inside to taste her. Every instinct she had ever been taught about shrinking herself, about hiding her body, evaporated in the fiery heat of his touch. His large hands mapped the geography of her body with absolute reverence. He gripped the heavy, lush weight of her thighs, pulling her flush against him so she could feel the hard, undeniable evidence of his arousal. He groaned, a deep, guttural sound, as she threaded her fingers through his dark hair and pulled him closer, kissing him back with a desperate answering fire. He loved the way she felt, the softness of her belly pressing against his hard abs, the generous swell of her breasts spilling over the velvet bodice as he dragged the fabric down to expose the creamy skin of her cleavage. "You're perfect," he breathed against her neck, his teeth grazing her pulse point. "So soft, so completely mine." He was kissing his way down the slope of her breast when a sharp electronic chime pierced the heavy air. Dominic froze, his breathing ragged. He pulled an encrypted phone from his pocket. The screen flashed a single message. "House clear. Rats exterminated." He let out a long, frustrated exhale, resting his forehead against Chloe's. He reached up, gently smoothing the velvet of her dress back into place, his fingers lingering on the soft curve of her collarbone. "It's over," he said quietly. "My men have secured the perimeter." He pressed one final bruising kiss to her lips before stepping back, the cold Mafia boss re-emerging like armor sliding into place. "Stay behind me." When the heavy steel door hissed open, the kitchen was unrecognizable. The marble island was shattered, the stainless steel appliances riddled with bullet holes, but the house was salter. Save for the heavy boots of Dominic's men moving through the corridors. Leo stood amidst the wreckage, wiping a smear of blood from his cheek. "3 dead inside, boss," Leo reported, not batting an eye at Chloe's disheveled state. "2 more on the lawn. They were Moretti's hitters, just like you thought. But there's a problem." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Speak." "They hit the South Side warehouse at the same time," Leo said grimly. "They burned the supply line, and Tommy Russo vanished. We tracked his burner phone to a dead drop in an alley near the loop. He's gone to ground, and he's got your 3 million. Dominic's eyes went dead, flat, and cold. "Tear the city apart. Put a bounty on his head. No one sleeps until Russo is in front of me." The sun was just beginning to rise over Lake Michigan, casting a pale, cold light through the shattered windows of the Lake Forest mansion. In Dominic's sprawling home office, the only room relatively untouched by the gunfight, Chloe sat in a massive leather armchair, a mug of black coffee clutched in her hands. Dominic stood by the window, a fresh, tailored suit replacing his ruined clothes. He looked untouchable again, a warlord preparing for a siege. "I'm having Leo fly you to a safe house in Aspen," Dominic said, not turning around. "You'll be completely protected there. You have a new identity, a new bank account. The Morettis know what you look like now. If you stay in Chicago, you're a target." Chloe took a slow sip of her coffee. The fear that had gripped her in the panic room was gone, replaced by a strange, crystalline clarity. She thought of her cramped apartment. She thought of the dusty archives at the Field Museum. She thought of Vanessa living a life of luxury while expecting Chloe to take the fall. And then she looked at the broad, powerful back of the man who had cooked for her, killed for her, and looked at her body like it was a masterpiece. "No," Chloe said. Dominic turned slowly, his brow furrowing. "This isn't a negotiation, Chloe. A mob war is starting. You are leaving." "I'm not," she replied, setting the mug down with a definitive clack. She stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from her velvet dress. She squared her shoulders, embracing her size, letting her imposing height and curves command the room. "Tommy Russo is hiding, and your men don't know where he is. But I think I do." Dominic crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "My best trackers have been on it for 6 hours. They have nothing. Your trackers know the criminal underworld. I know the dirt this city was built on," Chloe said, walking over to his massive mahogany desk. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and grabbed a pen. "Tommy runs shell companies, right? Real estate fronts. When I met him, He bragged to Vanessa about acquiring historical development properties in the Fulton Market district. He thought it made him sound sophisticated. Dominic walked over, standing close behind her, his chest brushing her back. Fulton Market has been gentrified for years. It's all high-end restaurants. We checked his properties there. They're empty. They're empty above ground, Chloe corrected, tapping the pen on the paper. But I'm a historical archivist, Dominic. Last year, I restored the original 1920s architectural blueprints for the West Loop meatpacking district. During Prohibition, the syndicates built a network of reinforced smuggling tunnels directly beneath those old slaughterhouses to move whiskey from the rail yards. Dominic went completely still. The city sealed most of them in the 1980s, Chloe continued, turning her head to look up at him. But 3 of the access points were privately purchased and grandfathered in under historical preservation acts. If Tommy bought those specific shell companies, he didn't buy them for the buildings. He bought them for the tunnels underneath. It's an untraceable, fortified bunker right in the middle of the city. A slow, wicked smile spread across Dominic's face. The look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated worship. He grabbed his phone and hit a speed dial. "Leo," Dominic barked, "pull the city property records for the Fulton Market district. Look for any basement access points registered to LLCs opened in the last 2 years. Tell the assault team to gear up. We found the rat." He hung up the phone and looked at Chloe, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. "Remind me never to play chess with you, Mia Regina. My queen." 4 hours later, the heavy oak doors of Dominic's office swung open. Chloe was sitting behind Dominic's desk, sipping a fresh cup of tea, her emerald dress swapped for one of Dominic's black silk dress shirts that draped beautifully over her curves. Dominic stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. Leo and 2 other enforcers dragged Tommy Russo into the room. He was battered, bleeding, and trembling violently. Right behind him, weeping hysterically and entirely untouched, was Vanessa. Vanessa's perfectly styled blonde hair was a mess. As soon as she was pushed into the room, she dropped to her knees. "Dominic, please. He forced me. Tommy made me go to the airport. He made me run. I didn't want to betray you." Dominic didn't say a word. He just let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. Vanessa sobbed, looking up, and her eyes finally landed on the desk. She gasped, all the color draining from her face. "Chloe," Vanessa whispered, her voice cracking in disbelief. She stared at her sister, at the fat, dependable, boring sister who was supposed to be dead or discarded. Instead, Chloe was sitting in the seat of power, wearing the mafia boss's shirt, looking down at them with absolute, icy calm. "Hello, Vanessa," Chloe said, her voice perfectly even. "I don't understand," Vanessa stammered, looking frantically between Dominic and Chloe. "Chloe, help me. Tell him I didn't know about the money. Tell him—" "You knew about the hit," Chloe said, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. "You set me up to be murdered at Bavette's so you could slip away to Buenos Aires." I had no choice," Vanessa cried, crawling forward. "I was terrified. You're my big sister. You're supposed to protect me." "I did," Chloe replied coldly. "I took your place. I paid your debt. But the ledger is closed now." Tommy spat blood onto the expensive rug, glaring up at Dominic. "You think you won? The Morettis are still coming for you, Castellano." Dominic pulled his gun from his holster with terrifying nonchalance. "The Moretti underboss called me 20 minutes ago. They didn't appreciate you using them to do your dirty work. They traded me your location for a truce. You're entirely out of friends, Tommy." Dominic raised the weapon, pointing it directly at Tommy's head. Vanessa screamed, covering her ears. Before Dominic could pull the trigger, Chloe placed her hand over his. Dominic paused, looking down at her. "Not in the house," Chloe said softly, her eyes locked on his. "It ruins the rugs." Dominic's lips curved into a dark, proud smile. He lowered the gun and looked at Leo. "Take Mr. Russo to the shipping yards. Make sure he understands the exact cost of stealing from me before he ends up in the lake." "No, wait!" Tommy screamed as the enforcers dragged him backward out of the room, his voice echoing down the hallway until a heavy door slammed shut, cutting off the sound entirely. Vanessa was hyperventilating on the floor, curled into a ball, waiting for her turn. Chloe stood up from the desk. She walked around it, her bare feet silent on the carpet, until she was standing over her trembling sister. "Look at me, Vanessa," Chloe ordered. Slowly, Vanessa raised her tear-streaked face. She looked at Chloe's thick thighs, her wide hips, her commanding presence. She looked at the way Dominic Castellano stood behind her, a lethal shadow waiting for Chloe's command. "You are going to walk out of this house," Chloe said, her voice stripped of all the sisterly affection she had carried for 30 years. "Leo will take you to O'Hare. You will get on your flight to Buenos Aires, and you will never, ever contact me or step foot in the city of Chicago again. If I ever see your face, I won't stop him next time. Do you understand?" Vanessa nodded frantically, scrambling backward. Yes, Chloe. I promise." Leo stepped forward, grabbing Vanessa by the arm and hauling her up. He led the sobbing blonde out of the office, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. The silence that fell over the room wasn't cold. It was breathless. Dominic stepped up to Chloe, sliding his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "You let her go," he murmured against her skin. "She's a fool, not a mastermind," Chloe said, leaning back into his solid warmth, closing her eyes. "And she's going to spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, knowing the sister she threw away became the one person in the world she has to fear." Dominic spun her around in his arms, his eyes blazing with dark, overwhelming devotion. "You aren't just my wife, Chloe. You are the goddamn architect of my empire." He kissed her, deep and possessing, as the morning sun finally broke through the windows, bathing the new king and queen of Chicago in gold. "Did you love this thrilling mafia romance story?" Chloe proved that true power and beauty come in all sizes, taking down a treacherous sister and capturing the heart of Chicago's most ruthless boss. If you want more intense, twist-filled romance dramas where the unexpected heroine claims her crown, you know what to do. Hit that like button, share this story with your friends who love a dark romance, and subscribe to our channel for more epic tales.